don't know if you'd be willing to let me segue a little bit off our script, because I think this is where we should talk about what are the issues of AI, because I think some are obvious and some are not.
Please. Yeah.
So when we talk about risks of AI, everybody first of all talks about, it hallucinates. And for those of you who are still catching up on terminology, hallucination is an interesting word. It's when the AI didn't know, so the AI just made it up, but it states it as fact. We always like to throw this company under the bus. They have fixed it since then, but this was the first high-profile case. When Google launched Bard on a big keynote stage and live streaming it out to the world, they asked Bard, what discovered, I think the exact question was like along the lines of, what discovered the first exoplanet? And it mentioned how the James Webb Telescope did this. It didn't. It completely made up the result, but presented it as fact. And that fact was then continued by the speaker, who of course isn't an astrophysicist, who then went, see, look how awesome Bard is. So when we talk about hallucination, and that's one that everybody talks about, so I won't hop on about it, it's just when an AI, it's a computer, it's going to be right. No, it won't. But the next risks are actually a lot more subtle and a lot more dangerous. So when we talk about Gen AI, generative AI, it's been trained on how things work. It's been trained on data sets to be able to find patterns. If I was to try and explain it in the simplest of terms, if I was to say, hey, here is a ladybug and here is a red Volkswagen, and said, how are these two things similar? Well, if I was to have an XY plot, I can go, well, these are colors, and this is organic to non-organic. They're both red, so they map here, but they're on different ends of the spectrum. And we call these vertices, right? When you look at AI, it's not an XY vertices. We're looking at 500, 800. In fact, each new AI is actually able to add now thousands of vertices. That when I'm combining these two things, it now understands exactly how there is context between these two objects. And this is what makes Gen AI so effective, because as I'm now typing in my very badly typed, grammatically incorrect, usually tonally inconsistent sentence, it's able to take that garbage, refactor it, understand it as a question, turn it into a proper question in its own terms, and provide me an answer. That is what generative AI is doing. And that's why when you're asking it to say, hey, make this sound like somebody else, it knows what that somebody else sounds like. But how? Because there was data it was trained on. So why do I make a big deal about the data? Well, many of our AIs were trained on a wonderful, even-keeled, balanced, clean data source called the internet.
Got to believe everything that's on the internet, right, Julian? Yes.
Yeah, and it's terrifying because, internet, as we all know, is full of fantastic information and incredibly scary information. And different AIs have tried to fix that by balancing, going, we're only training on these data sources, but all of these data sources present different bias. Now, as a teacher, I have inherent bias. Dan, as a speaker, you have inherent bias. It comes from us. It is who we are. It comes from the environment, the culture, the situation that we are in. But the good thing about that is only person impacted by my bias is my students, and that's thankfully a small subset. The only people impacted by your bias, people who listen to you talk, which is even a smaller no, I'm going to say that. Wonderful, wonderful audience. So, but we all know the joke I'm trying to make here. But when you look at the internet, what we've been seeing, and some of the early tests were done with things like DALL-E. DALL-E is an image generation tool, and a professor out of Hong Kong University, again, the name escapes me, my apologies, but if you go research this, you find the presentation up on YouTube. He went into Bing, which is Microsoft's public version of ChatGPT, and it's connected to DALL-E. And what this professor asked is, said, present me a picture of something beautiful that the world hasn't seen before. And it was nothing but images of landscapes and beautiful women, which, by the way, is our first bias. Is it negative? Comes down to definition of beautiful, definitions of sexism, but okay. The terrifying was the other end of the spectrum, where he rewrote the same question to say, present me something scary that nobody has seen before. And it was kind of pictures of like dark houses and a clown and a smiling African-American male. What we see here, and so when we talk about risk, and that's why it brings down this first rabbit hole, is the rabbit hole of bias. When you're dealing with a tool that you're expecting it to generate responses in text, or these days, video, oral, visual form, it is going to be provided with the inherent biases on the that it came from, and you don't know what that data is. So that's the first more subtle risk to talk about. The second subtle risk is your data security. And I brought this up as our very first example, and this is nowhere near where it needs to be right now. In fact, one of the reasons that I do use AI a lot, and I use AI on my laptop. Open source has fantastic tools. I'm using a whole bunch of AIs that aren't web connected, that happen purely on my MacBook, so nothing goes out to the web. Why? Because it means that when I'm feeding it, and I'm feeding it corporate data, I use it day to day in my job here at Quizizz. I promised Dan before we started talking here that, I hate bios, but you know what? I'm just going to put my CV in and get it to generate me an intro for this. So when you go, if you've come to this because you've read the website and thought Julian sounds really interesting, yes, a GPT wrote that. I'll take no credit. But again, the point I want to make here is that the data you provide, what is happening with that data? Now, OpenAI have very openly said that all data is used to train the system. And it was only just last month. And if you're not aware of this, please go to their website. You can now actually fill out a form to state that I do not want my data being used to train. But unless you go and you fill out that form and you submit it, the default position is data is there. Just before Christmas, I did a presentation at a university where I did a live demonstration on the screen where I was actually able to find somebody else's CV by talking to ChatGPT-4. And not only was I able to find someone's CV, I was then able to get their personal information. I got their email address, their phone number, their postal address, because they had put all of this into ChatGPT to probably help them with a job application or maybe to rewrite something. But that data became part of a data set that by asking the right questions, I was able to pull up in front of an audience, which, by the way, I regret doing because I didn't actually expect to be that successful. So that's the second risk. Please be aware of what's happening, not just with the data you're getting, hallucination, but what's happening with the data that you're putting into it. And are you feeling safe with that? Those are two areas I think people don't think enough about: bias and data security. The last thing on data security, and then I'll pass back to you, but is what's already happened is we're now seeing more and more AIs being able to be connected. OpenAI started this by going, we've connected ours to the web. It can search the web for you. Yeah. And again, it acted like a year 5 student who, when you ask them a question, it went, Google, the first 3 responses will be accurate. Yeah, I'll take that. And yes, it's getting better, but it's just connected to the internet. But nowadays, you can now connect lots of your apps. You can connect Gmail to an AI. You can connect Microsoft have released Copilot, which is again connected to their own form of what they call an isolated GPT. It's on their own Azure servers, so it's not leaking your data out. Again, do your research, but Microsoft are doing a really good job on this. But when you start going, I'm going to connect this thing to the AI. I'm going to connect my school data set to an AI. Yeah. Do you really know what's happening with that data? Right. So those are the things that we should be thinking about. Yes, what is it going to present to our students? That's rather obvious, but think about your data and think about the biases inherent in the system, because both those things are way more dangerous than I think most people realize.
Yeah, wow. Very, very thought-provoking. And I would echo those concerns.